out there, and make your phone calls, do your work, okay? Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. And if you're in the Pacific Northwest, stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
A recent headline blared, Labor shortages end when wages rise. Gosh, Captain Obvious, what an amazing discovery. Someone notify the Nobel Prize Committee, for surely this revolutionary revelation will win this year's prize in economics. Better yet, someone notify that gaggle of Republican governors whose theory of labor economics begins and ends with the
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down and, as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, Everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country. And the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care, by Thom Hartmann. Progressive Town Hall meeting. Congressman Ro Khanna of California will be here taking your calls for the hour. But other than that, it's you and me. I wrote an op-ed this morning over at HartmannReport.com about mental illness, Donald Trump, and us as a society. And what got me started on this was this reference that I keep running across to adrenochrome. Adrenochrome is I believe it's a breakdown product of adrenaline. It's produced, in the body someplace. I don't pretend to be any kind of expert on this. But there is this theory on the hard right that is embraced by the QAnon and Trump followers that this is the compound that liberals and Hollywood elites are extracting from tortured children in order to shoot it up and get high. And the first time somebody called about this, it was probably 6 months ago, somebody started talking about adrenochrome, and I just hung up on them and moved on. And I rang a bell, and I went back, when I was a kid. I was actually 1971. I was 20 years old, and that was the year Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas was published by Hunter S. Thompson. And he and Ernest Hemingway were, at that time, my two favorite authors. And Fear and Loathing in Vegas was my favorite book. The movie, not so much, but the book was brilliant. Just the style of writing. I was in love with Hunter Thompson's style of writing. That and Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail the year later about the Nixon campaign. But in any case, in that book, his fat Samoan attorney, his sidekick, is, they're running out of hashish and they're running out of opium, and his attorney says, a taste of this stuff. And he says, it's adrenochrome, and he got it from some child murderer that he represented as a lawyer. And that was entirely fictional, right? I mean, literally completely made up. And yet, there are now literally millions of Americans who believe this, who have taken this and it's been incorporated almost as if it was like high satire into the QAnon, pro-Trump conspiracy theory as real. This is shared psychosis, is what it is. And now that was, and in fact, I mean, one of this is what one of Trump's cultist followers, Liz Crokin, in one of her many videos, she says, it's a drug that the elites love. It comes from children. It's extracted from the pituitary gland of tortured children. It's sold on the black market. It's the drug of the elites. It's their favorite drug. Right. And then, a few weeks later when Mick Mulvaney held a press conference when he was the Office of Management and Budget Director and used the phrase pizza, she goes off, President Trump and his staffers are constantly trolling the deep state. That's President Trump's way of letting you know that Pizzagate is real. It's not fake. He's constantly using their words against them and throwing it in their face, and God bless him, it's amazing. Well, that was 2018. This week, Matthew Taylor Coleman, a guy who runs a Christian surf shop and actually was a member of a Christian surfing organization, took his 3-year-old son and his 9-month-old daughter from Southern California down into Mexico, and with a spearfishing gun, murdered them both. Stabbed each of them more than a dozen times to death. Why? Well, because he had learned from the Trump QAnon conspiracy folks that his children had lizard DNA, and this is a quote from federal officials. They said, his children are going to grow into monsters, so he had to kill them. It was the only course of action that would save the world. Those are his words. The University of Maryland's National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism notes that 68% of the open QAnon followers who were arrested at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and who had committed a crime before or after then, quote, have documented mental health concerns according to court records and other public sources. Their psychological issues include, quote, post-traumatic stress disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Remember the QAnon shaman, the guy with the big horns and the painted bare chest? He's now pleading mental illness, as are 2 others who were, quote, found to be mentally unfit to stand trial and were transferred to mental health care facilities. Of the 6 women arrested on January 6th, who also committed crimes before or after the coup attempt, the researchers note, quote, all 6 have documented mental health concerns. Which shouldn't surprise us. Donald Trump himself has well-documented mental health concerns. Dr. Bandy Lee wrote a book called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 Psychiatrists and Mental Health Experts Assess a President. It's literally 27 different experts talking about how dangerous Trump is because he's so mentally ill. Our buddy Justin Frank, MD, the psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry at George Washington Medical School, wrote a book called Trump on the Couch that is similarly alarming. Mary Trump, Donald's niece, who has a PhD in psychology and is a clinical psychologist, wrote an entire book about how he is mentally ill. He has a severe case of malignant narcissism. And one of the things we know, and Bandy Lee points this out, is that when malignant narcissists acquire positions of power or authority, it becomes contagious, essentially. Whether it's that they're bringing the narcissism out of the rest of us, you'll recall Dr. Frank once on this program. In fact, one of the people commenting on my op-ed today made this point. Dr. Frank said, you know, we all have a little sociopath and psychopath in us. It's part of the human condition. Usually we keep it under control. But it can be activated, it can be triggered, it can be brought out, and that's what Donald Trump is doing. And that's why you're seeing, for example, his followers going nuts on airplanes when they're asked to put their masks on. This is an exact quote from Dr. Lee when she was interviewed by Psychology Today about this. She said, when a highly symptomatic individual is placed in an influential position, that person's symptoms can spread through the population through emotional bonds, heightening existing pathologies and inducing delusions, paranoia, and a propensity for violence, even in previously healthy individuals. And sure enough, we've now got a half a dozen Republican governors who are passing laws that will force adult teachers and children to expose themselves to a deadly virus. You got Kristi Noem up in South Dakota inviting 750,000 largely unvaccinated, unmasked bikers to come to her state so that they can spread death and disease all over the United States, just like they did a year ago. Half of the Republican members of the House of Representatives are refusing to say if they're vaccinated, although, you know, I mean, these people are not idiots. I realize, you know, Louis Gohmert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, you know, okay, so a few of them are idiots. But by and large, they're grifters. These are smart people. So why are they refusing to say if they're vaccinated? Because they're trying to encourage behavior that's going to kill people. It'll disrupt our economy and it'll hurt Joe Biden and the Democrats. That's their strategy. And that's mental, that is mental illness on, you know, on display. And meanwhile, we've got this delusional pillow salesman who used to be a crack cocaine addict who's running around talking about this democracy-destroying conspiracy that the Senate in Arizona bought into and threw a bunch of money at, and Republicans in a half a dozen other states are trying to replicate. So what do we do about this? See, this is, you know, it's not like the 918 people who died at Jonestown signed up for suicide. They just fell under the spell of a malignant narcissist, Jim Jones. And, you know, they got wore down, or they became true believers. So how do we prevent that from happening to the rest of us? Well, Dr. Lee says the treatment is removal of exposure. That would be exposure to the pathogen, in this case, the psychological pathogen of Donald Trump. So media needs to stop giving any serious real-time coverage to him and his proclamations, and instead point out as often and as clearly as possible that this man is a criminal, a hustler, a con artist, and genuinely damaged, genuinely mentally ill. We replace him with a new national father figure, a person who has compassion and understanding, and we've done that with Joe Biden. And we have to break his bond with his followers by crushing his aura of invincibility. And how do you do that? You try him and convict him of just very ordinary crimes: public corruption, tax fraud, bank fraud, theft, rape. There's ample evidence of all of these things to send this man to prison, and you put him in jail. And if you don't, you'll recall, you know, Adolf Hitler, for example, although I hate Hitler comparisons because we're not talking about killing 6 million people here yet. We've only killed 600,000. But Adolf Hitler tried to overthrow the government of Bavaria and got put in prison for it, and then made a comeback. It's the comeback that's so dangerous. And if we don't stop Trump now, he's gonna continue with his attempt at a comeback. And, you know, if we want to save America, America must convict and imprison Donald Trump for his lifetime of very real crimes. My rant for the day. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this break at 17 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program, telling you the truths the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. By the way, 9 House Democrats are doing their best to blow up the $3.5 trillion infrastructure deal. I'll tell you about that very briefly on the other side of this break and pick up your phone calls.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's really grim news. It includes, the congressman here from Portland, Kurt Schrader, these sellouts. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today? Jeff, you are on the air. I've got Jeff on Hybrid One, and I'm not hearing anything. So and Jeff is usually, he's a regular caller. He usually knows what he's doing. But let's try Pat in Seattle. Pat, you are on the air. What's up?
Oh, thank you so much for taking my call. This question is about the filibuster. Mm-hmm. And, can you hear me?
I can, just fine.
Oh, okay. I'm on my phone. So anyway, here's my question. It's a little hypothetical, but let's say the Democrats in the fall wake up and realize they need to eliminate the filibuster. I'm going to talk fast, which technically and legally they can, I think, because it's not in the Constitution. Okay. Then we have these 7 rogue states that have passed the draconian voter suppression laws, basically from Florida to Texas. How would our federal government actually enforce vote for the people if people like Abbott and DeSantis said, too bad? I mean, I think they have gone so over the top that even if we pass vote for the people, get rid of the filibuster and pass that, what do you visualize as a scenario that would happen if we got rid of the filibuster and our federal government did pass vote for the people? Because in some ways, this is kind of a confrontation between federal government and the states.
Yeah.
On some level.
Yeah.
So I'll take my.
Sure, there's a bunch of moving pieces to this, Pat. The first is that, the Constitution is very clear that the federal government has supremacy over state governments when it comes to defining federal law. And Article 1, Chapter 4 of the Constitution says that while the states shall determine the time and manner of conducting elections, federal law can supersede the states. It just explicitly says that Congress may, at any time of their choosing, change those laws. So that's the good news.
Know that.
Yeah. The bad news is that this will almost certainly go to the Supreme Court, where we now have 6 right-wing cranks. And I don't know if the ex post facto law prohibition would apply here. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't. I think that has to do with criminal law, and this would be a change in civil law. But it's illegal to pass a law that makes things retroactively illegal. I'm pretty sure, I'm not an attorney, so I just, this is one area where I really don't know. But my guess is that the biggest challenge is just going to be the Supreme Court deciding that they're going to go along with it. And, the biggest challenge, of course, is going to be getting it passed. And you're right, the filibuster can be taken down because it's in the Senate rules, which can be changed with 51 votes rather than in the Constitution or at law. There's no law about the filibuster. So, did I answer your question?
But I just see DeSantis and Abbott and that kind of mentality, just saying, you can't just do that to the filibuster, and we're not going to, and then it would go to the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Would it be able to get to the Supreme Court quickly? I've heard people say that there would not be enough time, actually.
Well, that's a great question, because somebody is going to ask for a court injunction, a restraining order, essentially, preventing either the enforcement of the new law, in other words, so that the states can go ahead with voter suppression in 2022, or the enforcement of that law. And that's going to be, and the Supreme Court will rule on that very quickly. And that, and that will determine what the rules of the 2022 election are going to be. It's going to be dicey. It's going to be very, very dicey. The Republicans are hanging on by a thread. Pat, thank you for the call. Appreciate it. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmanReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmanReport.com. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartman Report and over at TomHartman.com. And on Hartman Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmanReport.com. And, of course, over at TomHartman.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that, you know, does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program, of TomHartman.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at TomHartman.com. Okay, real quickly, 9 members, so-called moderate House Democrats. Moderate is the word that we use these days for Democrats who are basically owned by large corporations or very wealthy people. 9 moderate House Democrats told House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this morning that they will not vote for a budget resolution, I'm reading from Jonathan Weissman in the New York Times, meant to pave the way for passage of a $3.5 trillion social policy package later this year until a Senate-approved infrastructure bill passes the House and is signed into law. The Democrat, in other words, they're blowing up. They're trying to blow up, and we'll hear from Ro Khanna about this at the top of the next hour. Congressman Khanna, I'm sure, has some thoughts on it. They're trying to blow up the efforts of the House Congressional Caucus, Progressive Caucus, to say we will only pass both pieces of legislation at the same time. These guys are saying, no, we've got enough votes to defeat the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and we're going to do it. And that's Josh Gottheimer, Democrat of New Jersey, Philemon Vila of Texas, Henry Cuellar of Texas, Ed Case of Hawaii, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, Carolyn Bordeaux of Georgia, Jared Golden of Maine, Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, and Jim Costa of California. And if one of those folks represents you, you may want to give them an earful. Let them know what you think about all this. So let's pick up your phone calls here. Ron in Las Vegas. Hey, Ron. It says here you're an anti-vaxxer. Hey. Seriously?
Yeah. Well,
what the hell does that mean?
I'm in my late 60s, and I have never taken a prescription drug, okay? And there's a whole world of people out here like this that depend on their diet to keep them healthy. Okay,
right. Your diet is not going to save you from this disease, Ron.
I've already had it. Okay, I've already had it.
Yeah, you can get it again.
It's not dead. So what? It ain't that. It ain't that bad.
Ron, I'm gonna let you go. This is not a conversation, frankly, that I think is worth having. This is done. Right? This is not a debate any longer. Ron, you're an idiot, and you're gonna kill other people. If you had it, you were contagious. If you get it again, you'll be contagious. Where do these people? Oh, my God. Conrad in San Diego, California. Hey, Conrad, what's up?
The way we did before, Tom. How do we pay for it? The way we did before. That's our bumper sticker.
Are you talking about taxing rich people?
Yeah. You know, Eisenhower and JFK tax rates.
Yeah. It's not that. It's not some kind of giant mystery, you know. And in fact, the Democrats are coming around and say, yeah, this $3.5 trillion bill, this piece of legislation, we're going to pay for it by raising taxes on billionaires and big corporations. And we're not even going to raise them back to where they were before Reagan became president. We're not even going to raise them back to where they were before Bush became president. We're just going to raise them, you know, a little more than where they were when Trump became president. And of course, the billionaires who don't want their taxes raised are paying off people like Kurt Schrader to do this kind of BS here.
I got another quick one for you. Instead of minority, majority, we need to use the word co-equal. We now have the brown people in our country will now rule co-equally with us.
Yeah, we're heading in that direction, and I think it's a good thing. Conrad, thank you for your call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything Goes Friday, taking your calls right after the break. Stick around. And Congressman Khanna will be with us at the top of the next hour. Reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot cannot have more than one head or it tears itself apart. Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyessa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives jurisprudence or guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by Four Arrows. By Nicole Perlroth. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at TomHartman.com if you want to really support our program. We try to have a lot of content over at TomHartman.com. And of course, every day my daily rant goes up at HartmanReport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3 hour program. It's a 1 hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3 hour podcast available at TomHartman.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann program. It's over at TomHartman.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at TomHartman.com. Well, welcome back. Donald Trump and his new vice president, Mike Lindell, have established themselves in the White House, today being the 13th of August, Friday the 13th, as predicted by Mike Lindell. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I think this really highlights the point of my op-ed today over at HartmanReport.com, that Trump's shared psychosis is destroying the fabric of our society. I am very concerned about this. Speaking of which, Kevin in Newego, Michigan, it says you're a Trumpster who wants to debate me. Say what?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay,
I just think, I was wondering where you stand on Biden having a cognitive test. I mean, everyone begged or made Trump go and get one. Why can't he go get one?
Don't think anybody made Trump go get one. Trump just did it.
The doctor's going to come back and say, this guy's got two marbles rolling around in his head. You know it and I know it. Anybody who watches him speak knows it.
I've watched him speak a number of times, Kevin. I've watched him speak a number of times, and he seems quite lucid, surprisingly lucid to me after his terrible performance at the Democratic debates.
You can honestly sit there and tell me you watch Biden talk, and there's no cognitive test that you think should be done?
That's correct.
Grandparents who have dementia. That's what Biden has.
Yeah, Kevin, I don't think Joe Biden has anything close to dementia. He stutters.
Oh, you're so full of it. It's unreal. How can you even say that?
Well, I just did.
I know. That's because you're brain dead along with him.
Well, I'm really not brain dead,
and half of Americans.
Okay, all right, Kevin. I think you've made your point, and it doesn't seem like you're going to go any farther than that. So, anyhow, oh my, what a day, huh? Sabrina in Syracuse, New York. Hey, Sabrina, what's on your mind today?
Yes, sir. This is, I heard people talking about, you were discussing mental illness and all that, but Now, I have bipolar, actually schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. It's bipolar with psychotic traits at times.
I know what it is.
But I'm very sane. I don't believe that he was mentioning Joe Biden. Joe Biden, he actually gets excited and starts talking. He reads a lot. He's got a lot of. He does not have dementia. He does have a stutter though, but we knew that before.
Yeah.
People thinking that Democrats are drinking babies' blood or something. I'm like, what? Do you really believe that? Pizzagate, there's no basement.
There's several million Americans, though, who believe this stuff, Sabrina. And I mean, you know, a guy showed up at that what is it called, Comet Pizza, I think, at that store. Which you're right, it has no basement. Looking for the kids in the basement, shot his rifle into the ceiling. People are taking this stuff seriously. This is, you know, sadly, and I think that Dr. Frank was right, that we all have inside us the ability to be pushed beyond our limits, and we all have within us a little bit of, you know, probably most forms of, quote, mental illness, and Donald Trump seems to be bringing it out in people in ways that are, I think, dangerous for society, frankly.
True. But I think if I hear something, I'm like, okay, how, like there was a meme that said that James Doohan, you know, the guy who played Scotty on Star Trek, was in D-Day. And I'm like, he is not that old. So, no, he did not. But if you use a little bit of logic here and there, you're like, okay, let me break this down and see if it actually is the case.
Yeah. Excellent idea, Sabrina. Thank you very much. Scott in Westwood, Kansas. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Today was the day that Donald Trump was supposed to be reinstated, according to the Pillow Man.
Yeah, and from the best I can see, you know, looking at all the news pages, it didn't happen. Yeah,
but I am curious, what would happen if an election was legitimately stolen? Obviously, this one wasn't. Would there be any way to, like, acknowledge that our current president is illegitimate and acknowledge that the legitimate president, or is that just not possible with our system?
You know, I made the argument in 2000 that the Supreme Court stole the White House for George W. Bush. George W. Bush lost the popular vote by 500,000 votes. And it turned out when the newspaper consortium actually counted the vote in Florida that George Bush lost Florida too. So Al Gore really was the legitimate president. And, you know, a lot of us were making that point, but hey, the Supreme Court had spoken, and, you know, we respect the rule of law, and the media was not going to go down that road, as particularly after 9/11. It was a month after 9/11. It was in November of 2001 that the newspaper consortium reported that, you know, by any of 7 different standards, if all the votes were counted, Al Gore would have won Florida. But, you know, nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to hurt George Bush in the middle of a national crisis. I get that. You know, I think it was I forget his name, Schlumberger or whatever his name, you know, the former publisher of the New York Times. He actually apologized for that. But I think going forward, it's going to be a very different dynamic. And I also, you know, it's funny that somebody updated my Wikipedia page after Trump's election to say in 2004, where's the effect of? I don't have it in front of me. In 2004, Hartman argued that the election was stolen by electronic machines and things. My concern, just for the record, was twofold. Number one, that Ken Blackwell, who is the Secretary of State of Ohio, had done a massive voter purge just before the election, and it hit the cities with large black populations hardest, and so that I thought was problematic. And then number two, the state of Ohio, if the news reports are accurate, and I may be wrong on this, and the reports may be wrong. To the best of my knowledge, it's never been thoroughly investigated, but you know, they had backed up their election systems to a server in Kentucky. If that's the case, well, you know, but my point is, you know, nobody wanted to nibble on that one either. And but I think going forward, there's going to be a whole lot more attention paid to people. Maybe it'll become really toxic to say the election was stolen from me.
Yeah.
Which might make it easier to steal an election.
Yeah. I know
just
you
don't
said
know.
a lot that Eisenhower was the last legitimate elected president.
Oh, I've been
just
making
wasn't-
that case for years. But that's...
Yeah, I've seen your show
Yeah.
a lot, and I've seen you make.
Yeah, but that's based on, you know, I mean, stuff that's fairly easily documented. That I don't get into the John Kerry election. I mean, you can document the 2000 with George W. Bush.
And Jeb.
Yeah, and Jeb and everything else. You can get into, you know, Reagan cutting a deal with the Iranians. That's a matter of
The October
public record.
surprise.
Right, the October surprise. You've got Nixon committing treason with South Vietnam, asking them not to go to the Paris peace talks and blow up, you know, Humphrey and LBJ's.
Wasn't that another October surprise?
Yeah, it was. It was. In fact, you know, this is Lyndon Johnson talking about this with the guy who was then the Senate Majority Leader, Everett Dirksen, the head
Everett Dirksen.
Republican in the Senate.
Here's the latest information we got. The agent says that they just talked to the boss in New Mexico, and that he says that you must hold out, just hold on until after the election. We know what Q is saying to them out there. Yeah, we're pretty well informed on both ends. Now, I'm reading their hand, Everett. I don't want to get this in the campaign. That's right. And they oughtn't to be doing this. This is treason. I know.
I know. But they, you know, Nixon pulled it off. It worked for him.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Scott, you know, we're going forward, we'll see. Thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it. Bill in Richmond, Virginia, it says, you want to disagree with me about moderate Dems? What's that?
Yes, sir. I'll tell you why, because I've thought this all along. There's been this comparison in the past of FDR and LBJ over Biden, or President Biden. Well, both of them had rather what I call massive mandates, you know, in Congress and also the popular vote.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I don't see President Biden having that. I mean, you know, no one has ever, and it can't all be gerrymandering, but if the House,
gerrymandering helps. You've got about
Democrats
20 seats in the House that would not be Republican if those states weren't gerrymandered. You know, you've got states like North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that overwhelmingly statewide vote for Democrats and vote for Democrats for the House, and yet in each one of those states you've got congressional delegations that are heavily weighted toward the Republicans.
Well, I've seen that door swing. In fact, I'm in Maryland right now, which the Washington Post has already called the worst gerrymandered state in the country.
Yeah, so let's end it. Let's end it right across the board.
The point I'm trying to make is this, is that if you've got that narrow margin, and why can't these moderate Democrats have this position?
They can. They do. I disagree with them. But yeah, I think they are sellouts.
Oh, who are they selling out to?
They're selling out on behalf of the people who don't want their taxes raised to the tune of $3.5 trillion.
Well, let's see. One of them's in Oregon, and one of them's in Hawaii, and one of them's in Maine.
Yeah, geography doesn't make people immune to what we used to call bribes before the Supreme Court legalized it.
Well, okay, in that case then, one of the things is you're talking about people that don't want their taxes raised. Well, I see that one of the things they're pending or working on it is to take the cap off on mortgage interest. Now, who's that going to benefit?
That's going to benefit anybody who has over $10,000 in state, you know, in state taxes, basically. The median value of a home here in Portland, Oregon, for example, is around $470,000. So, you know, that's roughly, for, you know, property tax wise, that's between $6,000 and $10,000 right there for most people, you know, for your median value home in Portland. And what Trump did is he set it up so that, and that's true, by the way, most of your larger cities, which is mostly in your blue states, that, you know, your home values are higher than they are in rural areas like Wyoming or, you know, West Texas or whatever. And as a result, people can't deduct from their federal taxes the taxes that they're paying to the state. And it was done specifically to screw the blue states. I mean, you know, the Republicans bragged about this.
Okay, point well taken, except for this. the third highest property tax state in the country is Texas.
Because
they have relatives that live there.
because they have no state income tax. The same thing with the state of Washington. There's no state income tax, so they have to get the money someplace, so they get it out of property taxes. And you're right. There are, the people who are living in Texas in, homes that are worth more than $500,000-600,000. I'm guessing. I don't know where the tax. I know where they work here in Oregon. I don't know Texas, but are going to get screwed by this. But those are the people who live in Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio, which are blue areas. So the Republicans, I think they're fine with it.
Well, aside from that point, this. Do you think that there's anything wrong with the standpoint, except for this tax situation, about the Democrats? Because the progressives basically have their agenda also that they're pushing for.
Sure. Yeah, everybody has their agenda. What I'm saying, I'm speaking specifically to this one particular issue, that these 9 Democratic members of the House of Representatives just threw a monkey wrench into passing that $3.5 trillion bill. And I believe it's because it is funded by raising taxes on rich people. Bill, I got to run.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Bill, thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM, and thanks for the call. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday. Don't forget, at the top of the hour, it'll be our Progressive Town Hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna. And welcome back. Celia in Santa Monica. Hey, Celia, what's up? Thanks for listening to KPFK.
You're welcome. I'm just responding to a caller from yesterday who said that the Republicans have a stronger message to activate their base, and the Democrats are behind on this. I was just in a training to go out and canvass and make phone calls in behalf of Governor Newsom to urging people to say no on the recall. They started that training session out with a slide presentation that just knocked my socks off. They went back and traced with the nice media slides and all the fact that racist and supremacist strands that have been in our history from the founding. And they had 5 little phrases that they said, here are the euphemisms for it. They started out by saying slavery is a positive good. Then it was the lost cause. Then it was vote for states' rights. Then birtherism, and now we have the big lie.
Wow. Yeah, and the positive good, by the way, was John C. Calhoun. That was the argument he made on the floor of the Senate in defense of slavery and in defense of the filibuster.
So then they went all positive, training us the rest of the evening, but they started out with that one, and man, we were paying attention after that.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Celia, so that's what you called about? You wanted to share that with us?
Just that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. I appreciate it. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Well, this is kind of ironic because I wanted to talk about the roots of evangelicalism. I got this from the American Theocracy, the section about religion by Kevin Phillips, and it's very interesting because the playbook. I'll get you, basically the evangelical playbook after the war was, or during actually the last 2 years of the Civil War, was set up by the ministers who realized that they were going to lose, so they started framing it in biblical terms, and a lot of the things is from the Old Testament about the plight of the Israelites.
And we're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, that kind of stuff. You're saying that the Southern preachers started this sales pitch as it became apparent the war was lost, the Civil War.
Yeah, because they framed it in this way of saying these were the only people who had blood spilled on their own land by the invaders, and that put them in a situation to have more salvation and redemption than anybody else. They had their, the slavery thing is from Ephesians 6:5. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and sincerity. They have that, but there's things that are amazing. They were baptized.
So David, forgive the interruption, but I'm looking at the clock. I've got 30 seconds. What do we do about this?
Well, I think I can't explain it as well, but I think people should realize that there's still, they call it about the backward glance, the lost cause. All of these things date back to that time. That was the original, start of the evangelical movement. So it's the same playbook.
Oh, interesting.
I think
the modern evangelical movement. It certainly was the Southern Baptists. I shouldn't say certainly. I'm no authority on the Southern Baptists, but my recollection is. David, thank you for the call. Yeah, this is serious stuff. It's and slavery. I mean, white people got addicted to free labor from black people, and for 300 years had free labor from black people, and then for another 100 years had pretty much free labor from black people. And there's no shortage of white people who would like to have that back. Sadly, we'll be back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, thomhartmann.com, we have, the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter's extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. Kimberly in Birmingham, Alabama. Hey, Kimberly, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you again. Talked to you about 10 years ago.
Oh, my.
I just wanted to encourage you and let you know that there are some liberal folks down here in Alabama, and not all of us are crazy. But this morning's news had a mysterious package left in front of the federal building in Birmingham.
Oh, no.
So, it's madness. It's absolute tribal madness. And I just want to know when my brothers and sisters are going to get rid of the tribalism, because all of this is based in tribalism.
I think, as I wrote in my op-ed today, I think it will happen when they are deprived of dear leader, when Donald Trump is put in prison.
Here's a little food for thought about dear leader who's in real estate. Okay, I couldn't figure out why would it be in the GOP's interest to kill off their own supporters. Here's why. They all own land. They all own land.
And therefore,
if they die, their land is up for grabs. A lot of these folks around here have a lot of, I don't think it's a stretch. I think, why would you encourage somebody to actively basically kill themselves?
Well, that's a damn good question. It's one I haven't been able to figure out the answer to. I just, the idea that there's
My thing is follow the money, right? The people that are doing this are not poor people. They're people with land.
Yeah, the people who are promoting the idea that you shouldn't wear masks and things. But I don't see how people dying, putting the occasional house on the market. I mean,
we're not talking about the rural folks that are dying. They have acres.
But they also have families that they pass it along to.
Yeah. I live in a rural area. My uncle just died, not from COVID, thank God, but for another horrible reason. But this piece of property right here is 3 houses easily. Mm-hmm. And then right down the street is new development.
So clean out the dead wood and I mean, this is kind of a variation on what, wasn't it, was it Patrick, his last name, the lieutenant governor of Texas? He said, I'm over 70, we're willing to die for the economy. This was back, I think last June, a year ago. I don't know, Kimberly. I'm not ready to sign on to that one, but you got me thinking. Let me ponder this. Kimberly, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from somebody in Alabama. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. But with Congressman Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton. Their own value. The book is Who Owns the Future by Jason Lanier. Who Owns the Future?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. We're going to do a progressive town hall meeting here for the next full hour with Congressman Ro Khanna. He represents the 17th District of California. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Khanna.house.gov is his website. And you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A. And Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program. I'm wondering your thoughts, if I may, as we start here, on these 9 Democrats, including Kurt Schrader here from just down the road in southern Portland, who have, it appears to me, blown up the Progressive Caucus's effort to tie the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill to the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill.
It's unbelievable, Tom. I mean, they haven't blown up the Progressive Caucus's efforts. They're trying to blow up Joe Biden's agenda. I mean, let's just be clear. The position they're taking is to the right of Joe Manchin. It's to the right of Kyrsten Sinema. Both Manchin and Sinema voted to advance the discussion. That's all this reconciliation budget vote is. They voted to advance the discussion on $3.5 trillion in the Senate. That didn't mean they agreed to the number. This is usually a procedural vote. Everyone should vote to advance the discussion on the president's agenda. And what you have these 9 members doing, again, to the right of Sinema and Manchin, is saying, we're not going to vote to advance even a discussion on the president's agenda unless you first pass the bipartisan bill. And they know that there are at least 60 people who aren't going to vote for the bipartisan bill. Even if the speaker brought it up for a vote, it wouldn't pass. And so it's really a destructive act. I'm confident the speaker is going to find a way to untie this Gordian knot, but it's a strange thing to put yourself so publicly out there in a letter, and it's a concern.
Yeah, I earlier speculated that because the $3.5 trillion bill is fully paid for by raising taxes on billionaires and corporations. And not even to the level where taxes were when George W. Bush came into office. I mean, it's going to be more back to, somewhere between George W. Bush and Donald Trump. And certainly they're not rolling back the Reagan tax cuts, or even close. That those big money interests probably had something to do with this. I don't want to ask you to speculate about the motives of your colleagues. I think that's probably an inappropriate question. But what do we do? How do we think of this?
Well, first we hold the line in saying that you can't just come to Congress and blow up the entire Democratic Party's agenda, blow up the president's agenda, and then expect to continue to have the goodwill of the Democratic Party. I mean, first of all, we also have to get certain facts out there. Tom, the total spending, according to the CBO, if we don't do anything, if we don't spend another dollar over the next 10 years, is going to be about $60 trillion. So this $3.5 trillion is in the context not of 1 year, of the next 10 years. It's less than a 5% increase in federal spending. And the idea that this is some kind of huge investment is just factually false. Second, we need to make the point you made, which is that this can easily be fully paid for if the billionaires and the corporations just start paying the tax that they actually owe, and if there's some very small adjustments and increases in the tax on the ultra wealthy and on these big corporations. And third, we've got to tell people what the bill is going to do. It's going to mean dental and vision and hearing and child care. I mean, it's really a extraordinary amount of things that the bill is going to mean for people.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Before we pick up calls, anything else you wanted to highlight for folks, or you wanted to make sure got discussed or pointed out when you came on the air? I kind of grabbed things.
I just want to point out that the progressives, we never do this, actually. I mean, we always get accused, the progressives, of how are we standing in the way of the agenda. At the end of the day, we actually compromised. We compromised on the $3.5 trillion, and we have actually been very, very willing and very perceptive or very aware that we have to support this president's agenda and want this president to succeed. And the president, it's not a coincidence that the president actually has had the most problem for people to his right in both the Senate and in the House.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's pick up some phone calls, all right?
Yes.
Let's do it. Rachel in Odessa in Ukraine. You watching us on YouTube. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, wow. Cool. That's me. Hi, Tom. It's been ages since I called in, but it's glad to be back.
Nice to hear from you.
And Mr. Congressman, wow, I'm really excited to be speaking with you. I think we've bantered on Twitter a few times, and I loved it. But yeah, to actually speak with you, I'm actually calling about, well, kind of, well, it's a Friday, so anything goes, about kind of speaking with, connecting with people with vaccine hesitant communities that you come across. I don't know if it's within your constituency or others within the United States. As I said, I'm in Ukraine. Ukraine has problems with vaccine skepticism. I'd say enough people know that they want the vaccine, that the slow rollout is starting to really pick up steam. As Tom knows, I lived in Russia for a while, and I still work online with a lot of people in Russia, and talking with a lot of people there who have vaccine skepticism, even those who have, an education in the STEM fields. And also, I should say, I actually. So
Rachel, forgive the interruption.
I went to Armenia
can we get right to your question for Congressman Khanna?
Okay, yeah, about just are there ways within both socioeconomic status and cultural communities, like different ways of, communicating with people with vaccine hesitant demographics, really?
Great question. Thank you, Rachel. And nice to hear from you. Pardon me.
Very important question, Rachel, and it is something that I have been dealing with being back home. And when I was back home in California last week in East San Jose, there are a number of neighborhoods, communities of color, largely Latino neighborhoods in our district that are socioeconomically disadvantaged, where the vaccine rates aren't where they should be. A part of this is because these families don't have a regular doctor. They don't have any regular health care. They don't have the school nurses or medical professionals who are looking after them. So we have to look at the economic deprivation in the first place. If we had a system like Medicare for All, where you had everyone part of the same system with health care, this wouldn't be an issue. So what do we need to do? I think we need to have an investment of resources in these communities, of having local doctors, local nurses, local healthcare professionals really outreaching so that people have all of the information and access and develop a trust with the community in ways that many of us take for granted because we all had those conversations with our own doctors and nurses who we trusted.
Bob in Hollywood, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. 3 times in history that I know about, our vice presidents, while serving as presiding over the Senate, have just come out and said the filibuster is unconstitutional and we're not going to use it. Why can't Vice President Harris do the same thing and eliminate our need to persuade Senator Sinema and Manchin?
Bob, the most pushback I've gotten probably since the president's been in office is I led a letter with 23 of my other colleagues urging the vice president to overrule the Senate parliamentarian so we could have a $15 minimum wage. I don't think there's a person in this country, or very few, who could name who the Senate parliamentarian is. I don't think anyone would have minded if that person had been overturned and if everyone had a $15 minimum wage. But the party pushed back, and my point is, yes, the vice president could overrule on the filibuster, but they weren't even willing to overrule a parliamentarian on what could be permissible under the Byrd rule. And I just think we have to be far more aggressive. We have to be far more aggressive to get our voting rights agenda in, $15 and all of the other progressive priorities.
Yeah, this is pretty critical stuff, and time is passing, as they say. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. 202-808-9925 is our number. We'll be back. Oh, his website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Khanna is also a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And welcome back. Robert on Bainbridge Island, Washington. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes. Hi, Tom and Congressman. I'm calling because of a major concern that I think most people, including health professionals, are struggling with regards to both vaccination and masking and steps to prevent transmission of the new variants, in particular Delta, Delta Plus, Lambda, and so forth. I'm calling, though, because I have come to an awareness that there is existing federal law, Title 42, Chapter 264, that calls for the detention and evaluation of people who spread public health risks. And I'm wondering if the congressman is aware of how that can be dealt with, how that could be pursued.
In terms of holding people accountable for who are...
The federal law gives the Surgeon General the right to essentially say that entire states can be quarantined and that people can be detained if they represent a threat of spreading a communicable disease. It's fairly, I've read it yesterday, it's fairly startling stuff, but I don't think it's been used in this country in a long, long time, if ever.
Well, I think one of the things we can use that for is just requiring mask mandates, which we've been hesitant to do. I mean, we haven't even had the CDC issue a full mask guideline. And then requiring what Gavin Newsom has done in my state, mandatory vaccines, at least for schools, for daycares, for child care providers, and then looking at proof of vaccination and other public accommodations. And I think that is something that we ought to have in this country with a religious exemption or exemption under extraordinary circumstances, but that we ought to look at what the Surgeon General authority has to see if he can do what the governor of our state is doing.
Yeah. Mick in Vashon Island, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for all the work. My question is this, in regards to the houseless and the mentally ill, what is your position on requiring vaccination to people entering grocery stores and other food outlets? Thank you.
Nick, I think we should do that. Certainly the states have the authority to do that. The federal government it's always been questionable. The federal government has the authority to do it with our own employees. I guess, Tom, under the Surgeon General directive or law, maybe the authority can go further, but states should do that. And I think it's reasonable to say if you want to go in a grocery store, you have to show proof of vaccination or require a test perhaps as an alternative, but that seems to me very reasonable.
We have 21 seconds, Congressman. Any thoughts on how? I mean, that would produce a huge blowback, would it not, if we were to absolutely mandate any of these things? Or is that working out in California?
I mean, look, Gavin's getting blowback in my state, and he's just mandated it for teachers who want to do it and for people going back to the schools. And I mean, how you don't say that sensible policy when kids are still unvaccinated and you want to make sure kids aren't getting this disease. I mean, I don't understand how some of these things have become so politicized, but he's getting blowback for that. Yeah, and the children's hospitals, their ICUs are filling up. It's like this is... I have a strong sense that this is very different from this is not, your grandfather's COVID kind of thing. No. Yeah, Congressman, we'll it doesn't take too many of those pictures with kids in hospitals, I think, for people to wake up.
Amen. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So we have over at HartmanReport.com my daily rant, which you can find there. And over at TomHartman.com, we have the free newsletter, which lists every single website, gives you hot links right out to every single website for every single story that I talk about throughout the program during the course of the day. And then, of course, also at TomHartman.com, we've got our weekly video that we put up. And the one this week is kind of mind-boggling. It turns out, if you remember back when Anthony Kennedy resigned from the U.S. Supreme Court right after Trump made remarks about his son Justin, who had signed off on $1 billion worth of loans from Deutsche Bank to Donald Trump, Kennedy resigned, and Brett Kavanaugh was nominated by Trump. And Christine Blasey Ford said he was, essentially guilty of sexual assault. All kinds of tips went to the FBI, and we have just found out what happened to those tips. It's all over at TomHartman.com. 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Jimmy in Texarkana, Arkansas. You are on the air with Representative Ro Khanna.
Oh, hello, Congressman. I have a simple comment that I wanted to tell you guys. You might want to each share with your Republican friends, and that is that Republicans, I think they lean toward communism, while the Democrats, both of them are capitalistic, by the way, and Democrats lean toward the socialist. And I just wanted to leave that comment with you.
Well, I think what Democrats believe is not socialism. I mean, the Democrats aren't for the government controlling the means of production. I think what the Democrats believe is in a free enterprise economy, everyone ought to have education, everyone ought to have health care, everyone ought to be able to live in a safe neighborhood, and you need those basics to be able to succeed. And that is really the essence of the reconciliation bill and the essence of what we're doing with the president's agenda.
Frank in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hello to both of you. My question or thought is a simple one. I know the promises, oaths, and vows are broken all the time. But in my simplistic way, I was wondering if everybody that is elected or selected, appointed for public service that must pledge something or take an oath in the beginning, why can't they be asked to take an oath every year? Because maybe that would flush out some people who would, if you object to it, why would you? And we wouldn't have to wait 4 years to find out if a person who took an oath really meant that they were going to keep it. That's it. Thank you.
Frank, I'd support having people take the oath every year. I unfortunately am not sure it would do much because there are people who take the oath and then cynically betray it the next day. Maybe my cynicism has been heightened when I've seen how the Republicans have not even allowed for an inquiry into January 6th. And if you're taking an oath to defend the Constitution and the United States and you're turning a blind eye to people who attacked our democracy itself, it doesn't seem to me that those people are taking the oath very seriously, and I don't think having them repeat it every year would have changed the outcome.
Kevin in Santa Rosa, California. You're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hi. In the last day or two, Tom said that the mail is about to slow down again. The state of California is about to mail out a ballot to every registered voter. I think that Louis DeJoy is trying to flip the California recall election.
Well, I have not heard this, Kevin. Tom, have you heard about the mail being slowed down again? I was not aware of that.
The post office, there was I'm pretty sure it was in the New York Times last week, that in the next couple of weeks was going to be the day that the post office was formally changing their standards for on-time delivery and allowing for slower mail. I can't give you more detail than that. I'm sorry.
Well, we need to look into it, certainly. I mean, last election, I didn't get my ballot in California. I had to request it. It didn't come. So, this is a real issue with the mail. And unfortunately, the recall is much closer than I would have liked. I mean, there is a real concern there. President is going to be coming out. And so I appreciate you raising it, and I'm going to look into it and raise it with other people to make sure we're vigilant and that the ballots are getting there in time.
Gary in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Keeping in mind United Nations climate change report that says we'll have 30 years of dramatic weather that we're experiencing right now, what could be done about Oshkosh getting the government vehicle contract where they'll only make 10% electric, while originally it went to Workhorse, who was going to make 100% electric vehicles?
Well, I don't know the specifics of that particular case, but I will say as a general matter, I think the government ought to be prioritizing climate in our procurement decisions, and we ought to be giving a benefit to the things, whether they're automobiles that are electric and energy efficient or in general the products that are more energy efficient. And we should be writing that in to our standards. I'm working on doing that on the Armed Services Committee for procurement agreements related to our military. But that's one huge role the government can play in tackling the climate crisis.
Yeah. Speaking of which, just a minute ago, my phone, my wristwatch, Sean's phone, they all went off with this alarm. And it turns out it was a heat alarm. We're going to hit 104 today.
Wow.
And
yeah, you know, I mean, people are feeling it. I mean, obviously in my district, I mean, we've got wildfires, and it doesn't take a scientist, right? It's drier and it's hotter, and that's why the fires are worse. And I think young people understand that, and that's why they understand the urgency of the crisis.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Ro Khanna with us for the hour, a National Progressive Town Hall meeting, taking your calls. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You can find his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. For our book club today, we're reading from Thomas Frank's book, Rendezvous with Oblivion, Reports from a Sinking Society. This is chapter 1, titled Servile Disobedience. Social scientists have tried for more than a century to understand how class works. Psychological experiments on the subject, however, are a relatively novel thing, so I was surprised to discover a few years ago that psychologists had published a series of papers on the behavioral aspects of social status, and that their findings were almost uniformly unflattering towards society's winners. In one 2009 study in Psychological Science found that in conversations with strangers, high-status people tend to do more doodling and fidgeting, and also to use fewer engagement cues, looking at the other person, laughing, nodding their heads. A 2010 paper published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that lower-class individuals, in quote, turned out to be better performers on measures of such pro-social virtues as generosity, charity, and helpfulness. A third study found that those of higher status were noticeably worse at assessing the emotions of others or figuring out what facial expressions mean. All of which is to say the rich are different from you and me. They are more rude and less generous. They don't understand, they don't get what others are thinking, and apparently they don't really care. Perhaps this is obvious to you. After all, people don't design toxic debt obligations by calling out what they learned in Sunday school. Still, the research aroused media interest. The Christian Science Monitor's 2010 account of one study ended with this quotation from Michael Krauss, then the University of California, San Francisco, who was one of the researchers, quote, "Being empathic is one of the first steps to helping other people. One of the first things we're really interested in is what can make wealthy people, affluent people, the people with the capacity to give, what can make them empathic?" I think I see the urgency of Dr. Krauss's question. After all, we have spent the past several decades doing everything we could to transfer the wealth of the nation into the bank accounts of the affluent to send them victorious, happy, and glorious long to reign over us. Oh, we've cut their taxes, gladly transferring much of the cost of keeping their property safe onto our own shoulders. We've furnished them with special megaphones so that their voices can be heard over the hubbub of the crowd. We've conferred upon them separate and better schools, their very own transportation system, and a full complement of private security guards. We've built an entire culture of courtiers and sycophants to make their every working hour an otherworldly delight. We let them construct a system of bonuses and executive compensation on the theory that it would be good for everyone if the people at the top got to take home much, much more than the rest of us. And when it turned out that the theory was wrong, that in the most famous cases, executives chased bonuses not to the shareholders' benefit, but at their expense, why, we promptly bailed them out. We allowed them to step into the Fed's discount window and fill their pockets. We generously transferred their reckless investments to our balance sheet, and we chastised them with little more than a polite request that they please not do it again. We've done everything we can to lift them up and exalt them as the new Leviathan. The least they can do in return, one feels, is to show a little empathy. Besides, look what we've done with the old Leviathan, the government. For decades, we've attacked it, redirected it, outsourced it, and filled it with incompetence and cronies. Yes, it still works well enough when we need to blow up some small country, but those branches of it designed to help our Americans of lower socioeconomic status, in quotes, as the scientists would put it, are now bare. We need the rich to be nice. We need them to stop doodling, paying and to pay attention and get generous. Now that the government has divested from the empathy business, we need the rich to discover brotherly love and fast. Come to think of it, wasn't that supposed to be the deal in the first place? The arrangement Andrew Carnegie brokered over a century ago when he made his big career move from Steel King to public library baron. The laissez-faire social contract would grant private business a free hand, but in exchange, those who piled up massive wealth were supposed to extend a magnanimous hand to the rest of us. As Carnegie wrote in his famous 1889 essay, The Gospel of Wealth, we don't need socialism to solve our problems. Philanthropy is the true antidote for the temporary inequality distribution of wealth and reconciliation of the rich and poor, quoting Carnegie. Going further, Carnegie argued that the duty of the man of wealth was, quote, to consider all surplus revenues which come to him simply as trust funds, which he's called upon to administer in the manner which, in his judgment, is best calculated to produce the most beneficial results for the community. The man of wealth thus becoming the mere trustee and agent for his poorer brethren, end quote. That same way of thinking led Carnegie to support the estate tax. Of all forms of taxation, this seems the wisest, he wrote. It was wise because it would, quote, induce the rich man to attend to the administration of wealth during his life. And if he didn't, then the tax would return most of his hoardings to the community from which it came, using Carnegie's words. Vestiges of the Carnegie attitude survive to this day. 2009 study of high net worth individuals by Barclays Wealth confirmed that American philanthropists tend to understand their giving in a context in which the state is either absent or irrelevant. And of course, there are plenty of nice plutocrats who don't fidget or doodle when talking to strangers and who have no problem endowing a ward or a wing in return for a commemorative plaque. The business headlines even occasionally tell of billionaires coming together under the leadership of Warren Buffett and Bill Gates to donate their fortunes to worthy causes. But the billionaires with the strongest sense of class solidarity have a very different plan for their disposable income, activating their lobbyists in Washington, building grassroots movements to march on their behalf, and using their media properties to run experiments on human credulity. Rendezvous with Oblivion is the Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. We have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's this one's a geeky science one. And it's about this little snippet of genetic material, what's called microRNA. And the name of this one is called MIR1, MIR1. And we've known for years that when muscles are used, when I'm talking about, exercise to the point where you feel fatigue in your muscles, that when exercises are, when muscles are exercised, it depletes them of MIR1. What they didn't know is where that MIR1 goes and what it does. And it turns out that our fat cells draw the MIR1 in from the muscles, and it causes the fat cells to start converting themselves into fatty acids that can be used to feed the muscles. So we're not just building muscle, but we're also reducing fat in our body. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm going into depth on it in this new video. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Robert in Pensacola, Florida. You're on the air with Oh, by the way, before we get to that, hang on just a second, Robert. Congressman, somebody had referenced the Postal Service. This is from 2 days ago from one of our local stations, KSL.com. The U.S. Postal Service on Friday finalized a plan effective October 1 to slow down some first-class mail deliveries as part of efforts to cut red ink. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy proposed in March to revise existing 1 to 3 day service standards to 1 to 5 days for first-class mail. USPS said on Friday that 61% of first-class mail will remain at its current standard. USPS said in a notice published in the Federal Register, and then they go through the whole rationale for this. The mail is going to be slowed down starting October 1st.
Well, that's concerning. Fortunately, it doesn't seem like it's deliberate on the recall, which is September 14th, but still needs to be looked into.
Yeah, there you go. Robert in Pensacola, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Tom, I'd like to thank you for all the wonderful things that you do and all the great information you provide. And I'd like, as a third-generation Los Angeleno, I'd like to thank Mr. Khanna for all the hard work he does. I have ideas. I have a couple of ideas that I'd like your opinion of.
Please pick one.
Yeah, I will. The first thing is the state of Texas could very easily be. I think that all of these recalcitrant Republicans could be brought to heel through a process of reverse engineering the military budget that goes to all the different states. The state of Texas has already given us the perfect excuse with their power grid. All the president has to do is order the Pentagon under threat to national security to remove all the military people and all the military contractors out of the state of Texas until they can fix their grid and make it dependable and connect it to a larger grid for backup.
Congressman?
Well, Robert, what I would want to see is that the federal government take a ownership stake in these grids or require them to hit up to some standard of compliance. We pass a law saying, look, all state electricity grids have to hit a certain regulatory compliance, and if not, the federal government will intervene. I don't think it's reasonable to say that the federal government is no longer going to protect the state of Texas, but we can have a compliance standard across the country.
Steve in Malibu, California, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, you guys. I just wanted to ask, I'm vaccinated, and I was really surprised when I went to get my shots that they just, gave me this cardboard card, which just seems so easily counterfeitable. And with all the money that the CDC gets, I would assume, from our government, why don't they have a phone app, a web app that you can register your vaccination? You could check your vaccination, and other people could check it, and you could use it as a passport, a secure ID to show that you're really protected. And I'm not quite sure if there's something that, I can't be the first person to come up with this idea, and I was wondering if there's anything you can do, Representative Khanna.
It's a great idea. I mean, I think that the concern has been people's privacy, but there are ways to design those apps which can be opt-in, so people can opt into doing that, and ones that really anonymize the data and make sure the appropriate people have access to the data. So it's something we should do. One of the things I've proposed is the Internet Bill of Rights, which I think is so desperately needed in this country, not just to protect people's privacy, but to build trust so that people are willing to have things like what you're proposing. But we have so little trust with either the tech companies or the federal government in terms of privacy, I think it makes it harder to implement the type of programs that you're talking about.
Norma in Montgomery, Alabama, you're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Well, you kind of stole my thunder with the United States Post Office. I mailed a package on the 31st. It's still sitting at the main office here in Montgomery.
Wow.
But I also wanted to talk about these videos that are going around about COVID. There's one that's been put out there by an organization called America's Frontline Doctors, and this video has convinced my family members that they should never, ever get a shot because it will alter their organs. Is there any way that you can stop this type of stuff from happening?
I think, Norma, that is deeply concerning. There are standards under Brandenburg, the Supreme Court case, that if speech is a threat to public health, if there's misrepresentation that is a threat to public health, that you can actually take down. That's not protected speech under the First Amendment. And it sounds like, without seeing the details, that what you're talking about comes pretty close to that. So I just think we have to be enforcing our Supreme Court First Amendment jurisprudence, which is not to say all speech is allowed. There's speech that incites violence, speech that is a threat to public health, that doesn't belong out there.
Jeff in San Francisco, you're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Yeah, I think one of the big things we need to get into is some leverage. And one of the big leverage things we can have is with unions. And I just want some progress to be made on the PRO Act for a union. And there's also a new thing going through, I'm not sure if it's an act or what, to where your union dues can be tax deductible. Could you expand on this and the importance to have unions?
Jeff, thank you for bringing this up. Let me give you two very specific examples of why we need the PRO Act. Everyone knows that Amazon workers have not been treated fairly. They are, in many cases, seen as appendages to robots. They haven't gotten proper sick leave, pay leave. They have not had proper PPE. And yet all these unionization campaigns have failed because millions of dollars come in and prevent the unionization. What the PRO Act says is we're no longer going to have these millions of dollars of campaigns making it hard for unionization. You can actually, if you want to join a union and people sign the cards to join a union, you can have a union. And secondly, the PRO Act says we're not going to allow Uber and Lyft to spend millions of dollars to have the right to treat employees as contractors. It is one of the most significant pieces of legislation that would actually raise wages, raise benefits for the working class, and we ought to pass it through the Senate. We ought to pass it without the filibuster.
John in Portland, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi there, Tom. Hi there, Congressman. I'm a janitor at a local spot here in Portland in Multnomah County, which recently reinstated a statewide mask mandate. I have to wear a mask when I'm working indoors, when I'm working outdoors in this heat. Today's my Saturday, so I get to call in and talk to you folks. My question is, and my ask of the two of you is that as a sign of solidarity to those of us in the working class who do have to wear masks indoors and outdoors at all times by our employers, why don't you guys wear masks whenever you're in front of a camera? And any public official or anybody who is wanting to display solidarity and to perpetuate the behavior of mask wearing. I would ask that whenever you're in front of a camera, essentially, you wear a mask.
John, it's a good point. It's certainly something I will consider. I do wear a mask if I'm in a situation that is required. So anytime I'm not alone in an inside building, and if I do TV interviews in that way, I'll do those interviews with a mask. I've tried to do it in a way that's compliant with the rules. But you're right that we need to make sure that we are giving the message of wearing masks and following all the rules in our jurisdictions, and I appreciate you're doing that at your workplace.
Andrew in Seattle, you're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hello, Mr. Khanna. I wanted to mention student loan. When I typically hear people discussing student loan forgiveness, they talk about the total amount, whether it's $10,000 or $50,000 or the entire balance. But something that I don't hear discussed much is refinancing at a lower interest. And I wanted to bring up that when the PPP loans were given out, if somebody didn't use it for payroll, they could essentially buy anything they want or use it on Wall Street. They got to pay that back at 1%. So I'm asking, why can't student loans be paid back at 1%?
And I think we could have lower interest rates on the student loans, but I think some of it just needs to be forgiven, especially for people making under $100,000, where they have $30,000, $40,000 of debt. The proposal says if you went to school and you're working class or middle class under $100,000, up to $50,000 of that debt should be forgiven. Because you can't, even with the interest rate, that's a lot of money of monthly payments for people, and they can't buy a house, they can't get their life started.
We're talking with Congressman Ro Khanna. He's a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at RepRo, R-O, RepRo Khanna. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It's our Progressive National Town Hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann program. And welcome back. Let's see here. Grace in Los Angeles, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thanks. My question is regarding what is the plan for enforcement on masks and vaccinations. And to me, it seems like we are really turning our lowest paid, least well-trained workers into COVID cops. And we're looking at 85% of the world right now being unvaccinated. So this is going to go on. I mean, if we were vaccinating the world, our own unvaccinated would not be as big of a deal. But obviously that's not happening. It's not going to happen anytime soon. So now we're seeing, you know, people throwing masks in people's faces and and people being punched. And what's the enforcement plan to protect our workers from being turned into these, police that they're not?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, obviously, the cultural division is very unfortunate on mask wearing and on compliance. And I think we just are going to have to figure out what the rules are. And then you're right to have people empowered to enforce those rules. But there's no way that we can have a situation without masks and without having some mandate on vaccines, given the spread of these variants. And you're right that, unfortunately, variants are going to keep coming until we have a higher threshold of vaccination in this country and around the world. So the bottom line is we need to figure out what the rules are going to be and then empower people to enforce those rules.
David in Olympia, you're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hi. I have two questions, sir. Number one is concerning the military. Why do we have 25% of military families on food stamps? Some 620,000 visit food pantries to feed their families. That's my number one. Number two, why doesn't anyone talk about the Republicans who receive a lot of money from the Russians? I'll take my answer on the air.
Thank you.
David, thank you for both questions. On the military families on food stamps, that's inexcusable. I'm always for funding and paying military families, and it's a tragedy that so much of the defense budget goes to defense contractors, where the average CEO pay of the big defense contractors is $20 million, and the average executive pay is over $5 million. So what we ought to do is look at our defense budget. I believe it ought to be cut in certain ways, but what we ought to be doing is paying our military families appropriately and not the defense contractors. On the payments by Russians, all I'll say is we ought to have strict disclosure laws for every elected official, whether it's the President of the United States or a member of Congress, to have to disclose right away any payment of any kind by any foreign government. And it's amazing to me we still don't have that clear disclosure requirement.
I think, I thought for a long time that was in law, that campaign contributions from outside the United States were illegal.
Campaign contributions are illegal. I thought that what he was talking about is the type of things that Trump did, which is business activity and business activity with foreign governments. I mean, obviously, campaign contributions are illegal, and direct payments from anyone is illegal. But it's not clear to me if you have business interests that have foreign payments of the kind that Donald Trump had. I mean, we're now getting his tax returns, but Trump paid $400,000 back to the Treasury for foreign payments. I don't understand how that's allowed.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be right back after I read an ad over on the commercial side of the show here for SiriusXM and our commercial stations. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmanReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmanReport.com. So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies? There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at TomHartman.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls. Bill in Sierra Blanca, Texas. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Representative Khanna. Yes, I'm a big fan of you and all the good work of the Progressive Caucus. But I did want to take a little bit of issue with you, Representative, on your comment regarding the Postal Service electric vehicles. You know, originally there was supposed to 100% of all of the massive fleet of electric vehicles were supposed to be electric. The Postmaster General then has a contract with Oshkosh, and now only 20% of them will be electric. I think we're in a climate emergency. We need them 100% electric and not just energy efficient. And I urge all of you in the Progressive Caucus to maybe write a letter stating that we need complete electrification of our fleet. It would set a good example to the rest of the nation.
Bill, I agree with that. I do not know the specifics of the contract dispute and the purchasing dispute, but I will look into it after this call. But I agree with you that we ought to be moving to a 100% electric vehicle fleet at the with the Postal Service. And if that is not the case, then I'm happy to have the Progressive Caucus weigh in on it. So let me look into that issue.
Andy in Grand Rapids, Michigan, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good Friday, gentlemen. Hey, Congressman, I think the progressives have to change our narrative here a little bit, because all I ever hear from all of my conservative friends here is, oh, my taxes, my taxes, my taxes. I go, you know, you got roads, you got police, you got fire. I says, what you should be saying is, why isn't the corporations paying for this? Why aren't they paying their fair share? Because, you know, they all get tax breaks from paying school taxes. Well, if they're not paying it, somebody has to pay for it. And the Republicans don't want to raise taxes. So I think it's time business paid their share and just, you know, we took their tax breaks away from them once again. And then I got another quick question. Trump better not get off on the statute of limitations. They can't be running out on him. Please.
Okay. Thanks, Andy.
Andy, on your first point, I agree with you on the way you're messaging it, that the taxes are not going to go up for the working class. They're not going to go up for the middle class. They're not even going to go up for the upper middle class. This is not going to be a tax even on the doctors and lawyers. The taxes are going to go up on where the wealth is concentrated, on the ultra wealthy, on the billionaires, on people worth more than 20, 30, 40 million, on the big corporations. And if you have a wealth tax on ultra wealth, if you raise taxes on those huge corporations, you have more than enough revenue to pay for the social safety net, to pay for roads, bridges, education, and health care. And it's appropriate to tax that high concentration of wealth because that's where a lot of the wealth has gone, and other people have been struggling with the changing economy. So that has to be our message, and we have to continue to hammer that point. On Trump, I agree with you. We have to hold him accountable because we can't set a precedent that a new president can do whatever some new president would do what he did.
Gerald in Fresno, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna. We're down to about a minute and a half.
Real quick, thank you for taking my call. Has anybody considered having President Biden issue an executive order that the insurance companies do not have to pay for COVID treatment if they have not been vaccinated? I'll take my answer off the air.
Gerald, I don't know if that we can do that. I mean, I don't think if someone is unvaccinated and they end up at the hospital that we want to say, well, we're not going to treat you, or you're only can afford treatment if you're rich. I think that would be inhumane. I think we have to figure out other ways, though, of mandating and requiring vaccination.
Okay, let's try to get, actually, I have a minute, about a minute and a half here. Jeff in Winslow, Arizona, you got a quick question?
Yeah. I was wondering what we could do about the filibuster legislatively or maybe through the courts. That it seems to me that it goes against our whole principle of democracy.
Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff, I agree with you that the filibuster does go against our democratic principles, particularly when it's denying black people the right to vote, and particularly when it's been used to deny black people their civil rights. the point is, though, the only people who can overturn it is the Senate, because it's not something embedded in our Constitution. It's a Senate rule. Any Senate majority can get rid of it at any point. And they have gotten rid of it selectively when it suited Mitch McConnell's interests on getting people through on the Supreme Court. So we ought to get rid of it, at least when it comes to voting rights and certain key provisions.
Congressman, last 10 seconds, what should we be looking for in the coming weeks?
This reconciliation bill, Tom, is absolutely critical. I mean, it is the progressive agenda. It is the Democratic agenda. It's the Joe Biden agenda. It's about creating jobs and getting the investments we need. We've got to get the party behind it. I mean, these 9 Democrats who are opposing it is just appalling.
Yeah, I agree. Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Take care. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday right after this. It's Anything Goes Good Friday, or excuse me, Friday the 13th, in fact. Back with your calls right after this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. 7 o'clock shift change and bang pots and pans to cheer and sing to the nearly empty streets. The book Last Best Hope by George Packer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. 6 minutes past the hour. It's the third hour of our program. It's Anything Goes Friday, picking up your calls as you know, the COVID crisis continues to roll across the state. Twice now, in the last hour, I've had my phone and my wristwatch go off with an emergency alert. It's in both cases, it was a heat emergency here in Portland. They're now driving our cell phones to tell people that there are cooling stations that you can go to. And we had, a couple hundred people died in the Pacific Northwest with the last one of these little heat domes. What makes me crazy is that they're not reporting why this is happening. And I don't just mean generally global warming. It's that the jet stream is failing. It is failing to move weather along. It's the source of our winds, to boil it down really super simplistically. And it's not moving weather, and so these high-pressure domes just sit here and accumulate heat, and it's parts of Oregon today are going to be 105 degrees, and then other parts of the country are in a heat crisis as well. So anyhow, that's my rant, I suppose, for the day. Let's pick up some of your phone calls. Bruce, and speaking of Portland, Bruce in Portland, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, happy Friday the 13th.
Thank you. Back at you.
Yeah, I was calling about Schrader and the euphemistically called moderate Democrats. Mm-hmm. I live in Suzanne Bonamici's district, which is right next to Portland. What I plan on doing is calling her and asking her to get the other Oregon Democrats to start leaning on Schrader. Yeah. And if other Dems and other districts in the other states did the same thing, I don't know if it'll have an effect, but it's better than doing nothing. So get on the horn to your other Democratic representatives and see if they can put some pressure on these people to actually do the right thing.
That is the best suggestion that I've heard so far, Bruce. And Earl Blumenauer is my representative here in northern Portland, and so I will call him when we get off the air and make that same suggestion. I was trying to figure out, how can I best lean on Schrader, because he doesn't represent me. He represents the area south of Portland. But that's brilliant. Bruce, thank you for that. I appreciate the call. It's very good of you. And Sean, I'm going back to hybrid number one there. My apologies. Jeff in Winslow, Arizona. Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I'm calling to talk about the filibuster and the premise that perhaps this thing could be outlawed through the court system. It seems to me that it's unconstitutional. It's also anti-democratic. The most votes wins is a democracy, not a supermajority being required. So they say that this is to protect the minorities, and it doesn't. What it does is cripple the minorities. This voting thing that's going on right now is to cripple the ability for minorities to cast their vote, and they use this filibuster to not protect them, to crush them and crush those rights. It's not. Yeah. It's such a stupid thing that I don't know how this ever started in a democracy. Man, I don't care if you win by 1 vote or 1 billion votes, you won.
Right.
That's it.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're right, Jeff. And where this started was in the 1830s as a procedural process. Because of a weirdness back in 1803, the Senate never had an actual rule about how you move from one piece of business to the next piece of business. And so John C. Calhoun came along and said, okay, we're going to use that lack of a small d democratic process, in other words, a majority rules process, to say that a minority of senators can block the behavior of the entire Senate. This was 2 years after the House of Representatives had passed a rule and then passed a law saying that members of the House could not speak about slavery on the floor of the House of Representatives, because there was a growing abolition movement across the country. And in fact, after John Adams' son, John Quincy Adams, was president, he ran for Congress and was elected from his district in Massachusetts to the U.S. House of Representatives. And every single day he went into Congress and said, I want to speak about the abolition of slavery, just to piss everybody off and to break the rule. So over on the Senate side, John C. Calhoun said, okay, anybody who wants to talk about the abolition of slavery, we will simply refuse to move forward the conversation. We will not we can block a vote on whether there will be a discussion about this topic. And it was used exclusively throughout the 1830s, 1840s, and 1850s to block any discussion in the Senate about ending slavery. And then after the Civil War, from 1865 until 1965, it was used exclusively to block efforts in the United States Senate to pass civil rights legislation. And finally, in 64 and 65, they overcame that filibuster through Lyndon Johnson doing a hell of a lot of arm twisting and, you know, lots of carrots and lots of sticks and lots of threats and everything else. And since 65, the filibuster has been used for all kinds of other things that the minority of senators want to use. And this is where the word minority gets just badly distorted. The Republicans are a minority in the Senate right now, but they're using, as you correctly point out, they're using this filibuster to block the voting rights of actual racial minorities in the United States, specifically and largely African Americans, but also it's impacting Native Americans and Hispanics and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in large numbers. And it's just wrong. I mean, there's no other way to say it than that. It's just wrong. Melissa in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Hey, Melissa, Anything Goes Friday. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I was just wondering, we haven't really talked about student loan debt much, relief, that is, as far as anything we're hearing from the Biden administration, and that was one of the campaign promises. And I feel like I'm in this weird sort of unrecognized group of people that, since I don't have children, I'm not a business owner, and I only lost part of my income, that there just hasn't been relief, really, and yet since there's no talk of student debt loan relief, he just keeps kicking the can down the road as far as me picking up my payments again. You know, I don't see how to really advocate for myself, I guess, when it seems like there's so much more concern for families and children, and I feel like that's basically where all of the money goes all of the time, and they argue about that, but they don't argue about. They just toss, you know, $1.7 trillion or whatever to some corporations and billionaires, and that's okay. Right. No one even discusses monetary amounts.
Yeah, just the Trump tax cuts were equal to all student debt in the United States.
Right.
Which is insane.
Right. Yeah, and just talking about relief, you know, that would help, but a lot of us, frankly, it's changed a lot. My graduate degree loans and my undergraduate degree loans are two separate things. I paid off two loans separately in less than 10 years with my undergraduate degree, no problem. I'm never going to pay off my graduate student loans because the cost of tuition went up 1,000% in the meantime. And then as soon as I signed my promissory notes, basically the GOP Senate changed all the rules. Wow. And I'm on my third or fourth student loan company now that's taken over my federal student loan debt. Every one of them has been sued with numerous lawsuits, and is they're crooks, but they're still
it's grifter city out there.
Loan.
Yeah,
it is, and I don't even understand. One of my loans in 5 years, with me either paying them or deferring it, where only one is accruing interest, it's already 50% higher than what I actually borrowed. My principal.
Wow. Yeah, this is
in 5 years.
Debt trap. Yeah, Melissa, this needs to be at the top of the Democratic Party's agenda, and it needs to be a major issue. You know, number one, I believe that both Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden are wrong, and that he can, by executive order, eliminate a lot of student debt, the federal student debt. But the corporate student debt, which is what you're stuck with, Melissa, that's going to take something else. Those corporations are going to have to be paid off by us, by Congress, and frankly, I think Congress should be on it. Melissa, thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Anything Goes Friday. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Let's see here. Susan in Hood River, Oregon. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. This was actually for Ro Khanna, but I was wondering if you had any sense of what's preventing the feds from mandating vaccinations for anyone to get on an airplane.
I think they're actually a lot closer to it than anybody realizes. I didn't want to correct Congressman Khanna on the air. It's just, it's not all that polite. But if you plug into your search engine V-SAFE, the letter V-SAFE, V-SAFE, what you will discover is that the CDC already has a program in place. You can register with that program, and you get something that you can take a picture of and keep on your phone, which is basically a vaccine passport. And they just have not yet converted it into an app. And in fact, I did it. Sean was the one who told me about it, and she took a picture of it, and she's got it on her phone. So I now have 2 vaccine passports, one through Clear, which is a private for-profit company that offers, airport security. And this is something that you can use for your flights to Hawaii or getting on cruise ships and things. And Clear now offers them free, as well as for people like me who actually subscribe to the Clear service. But the V-SAFE program is also out there. And I suspect that once the vaccine is fully approved, which is presumably going to happen in the next 2 to 3 weeks, then it's entirely possible that they've got an app that they'll just roll out. I mean, it looks to me like everything's in place for that. John in Tacoma. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to catch the congressman, but maybe you can answer this question. Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Couldn't the Congress, now that we have power as Democrats, make it a law to, in order for a presidential candidate to get on the ballot, they have to show 8 to 10 years of income tax. And that way, that will kind of eliminate Trump, because he's doing everything in his power to hide them.
Yeah. And I think he's hiding them because he's got a lot of money that has come into his organization from foreign sources, particularly Russia, Saudi Arabia, UAE, countries that he went out of his way to benefit while he was president. And I think he's afraid that that will come out, that he's owned, basically. But I agree with your sentiment, John. The Supreme Court, however, I'm pretty sure would knock it down, saying that, the right to free speech is most broadly interpreted by the court in the political context, in the context of politics. And your right to run for president has been defined as part of your right of free speech, assuming that you meet the basic criteria in the Constitution. You're a natural-born citizen and you're 35 years old. So I'm guessing that if we tried to make that into law, it would not survive a Supreme Court challenge.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, appreciate the call. But we have established it as a norm, right? And that's been the case going back to the Nixon bribery scandals and everything else. And Trump has just defied it. And as I said, I am convinced that he is defying it not because he's trying to hide tax crimes. We all know that he's a cheat, a tax cheat. That's well established. What we don't know is what other foreign oligarchs and foreign countries own him and how much they own him. And I have a feeling it's really ugly. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at TomHartman.com if you want to really support our program. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench. And in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at TomHartman.com. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls here. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Today I'm putting my 9/11 Truther for World Peace activist hat on, and I am calling to just really express a gratitude and a happiness at the moment that we're finally pulling out of Afghanistan.
Amen.
It's been a disaster. It's been a disaster from the beginning. And also, I wanted to compliment you on having earlier this week having on a 9/11, what we call a 9/11 Truther, which is a conspiracy analyst. He did a great job at taking a look at kind of what went wrong in the big picture and what could have we, what should we have done. And
you're
I
talking
think
about Spencer Ackerman with his book. Let's see, Reign of Terror: How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump.
That is correct, and that's our song for 20 years, Tom. And the 20th anniversary this year is going to be very interesting. It's going to be fact-based and kind of softening the blow to your audience here.
Yeah.
There's also a great article in the Atlantic today about Bob McElvain, who lost his son on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
He was indifferent until he got the autopsy of his son, and that autopsy led him to think something different than the corporate mainstream media.
I don't completely share your worldview, Robin, but I don't dismiss it or and I'm not going to ridicule it or anything like that. And I do think that 9/11, Bush's response to 9/11 was criminal. Literally criminal.
I agree with you. Also, I just wanted to give you a tip here. Believe it or not, I'm the person who gave Dennis Kucinich the information that eventually got him to lose his congressional seat. It was in 2008 in Grays Harbor, Washington. I was standing with my 9/11 Truth for World Peace stuff, and he came to me and he said, stay here. Don't leave before I have a chance to talk to you at the end of it. And he said he wanted to give me give him contacts about the put options. And of all interesting things, okay, one of the person's names that I gave him, Dennis gave me his personal number, and I said his name was Paul Zaremka, and then the other was Don Four Arrows, okay, who you have on all the time. He was a very expert at the put options. And also finally...
Yeah, for people who don't know what you're talking about, there was a bunch of, the day before 9/11, millions of dollars of what are called put options, which is where you make money betting that a stock is going to collapse. Were purchased on the stock exchanges or on the options exchanges against the U.S. airlines, particularly American Airlines.
That is correct.
So Robin, I need to move along, but thank you very much for the call. Brian in Buffalo. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hey,
Buffalo,
Tom.
New York.
Yeah, I really liked your opening rant.
Thank you.
But apparently, you and I have Trump derangement syndrome.
Could be.
Okay, so. Yeah, it could be. Forget it. My thing is there someone in federal law enforcement with a set of balls? Because we already had Bob Mueller bring charges. I think it was 5 counts of obstruction of justice. Those are felonies. Trump should be charged. I mean.
Yep. Well, that's what I'm calling for, and probably better not to use sexist metaphors like that. But I totally get what you're saying, Brian. And Trump, we've got there's 20 women who are accusing him of rape or sexual assault. You've got the multiple bank crimes. You've got his own lawyer, Michael Cohen, saying he lied to the insurance companies and inflated the value of his properties, and he lied to the tax people and deflated the values of his properties. There are people in federal prison for those specific crimes right now.
Well, I'm infuriated because there's no charges coming, especially after January 6th.
Yeah, well, we don't know if they're coming or not, but and I get it that Merrick Garland and the Justice Department, they want to be very careful and not viewed like they're politicizing the Justice Department, and which is very wise, but hey, this guy is a criminal.
He makes Nixon look like a choir boy, and you know it.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you for the call. Michelle in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to let you know my husband's executive chef here at a restaurant in Kansas City, The Shift, which you might enjoy. And they made a decision to go, you have to show vaccination if you want to come in.
Oh, wow.
And they were concerned that they were going to lose customers. It made the Kansas City news, which I know is not a big deal, but it did make the news. And so the next day, the mayor came down with a group of people. Everybody showed their vaccination card, and they have not lost customers. They've actually gained them.
That's what I expected would happen. Back in the 80s, a friend of mine owned a really fancy restaurant in Boston, and he was literally the first major restaurant in the country to ban all smoking. And everybody said, oh, you're going to go out of business, Tom. He actually had business increase. I mean, it's like people want a safe, clean environment, particularly if they're eating. Michelle, good on you, good on your husband. Pass along my greetings. That's wonderful. And, may you live long and prosper, especially your restaurant. Thank you so much for the call. It is 27 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday, back with more of your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Talk media for the sane among us. Back with your calls after this. For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Schenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The whole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction. The disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. Most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. For our video this week for supporters of our program, you can find it over at TomHartman.com. We're talking about endocrine disruptors as modulators of obesity. This is, in fact, the title of the article in Cell Endocrinology was Endocrine Disruptors as Obesogens. Why is it that almost a third of Americans are obese? And that's not true of, say, Italians. And it turns out there's actually a single measurable, definable variable. There's a category, or actually several broad categories of chemicals that are found in the American food supply in particular places, and therefore fairly easy to avoid, that actually disrupt our endocrine system, our hormone system, and cause us to crave more food, to eat more food, and also downregulate our metabolism so that we burn less energy so that food gets stored as fat. You can check it out at TomHartman.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 4 teachers in Broward County, Florida, 4 in the last 24 hours have died of COVID. And Ron DeSantis this morning in this kind of rambling press conference was like, well, you get these airborne diseases and you get these waves, and we just have to put up with it. Like, the governor. Okay, Floridians, you're screwed. I'm not going to do anything. This is just bizarre with a capital B. It's really, I would say, even criminal. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Anything Goes Friday here. Doug in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Doug, what's up?
You should take taking my call.
Sure.
I had a question for you, and I would say that in addition to the filibuster, and I appreciate the background that you shared with us about 20 minutes ago, but above and beyond the filibuster even, I think the biggest problem we have in our American democracy right now is just the amount of money in politics.
Yes.
And it was a really big issue about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, pushing back against Citizens United. And I wondered whether you agree with that statement and whether you know anything about any approach to try to address it.
Yeah. Yes, I absolutely do, Doug, and I completely agree with you. I believe, Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, wrote an op-ed for the Sydney Morning Herald titled, Rupert Murdoch is the cancer at the core of Australian democracy. If I was to rewrite that, although I think, Murdoch has made his mark on the United States as well, I would say money in politics is the cancer at the core of American democracy. And Rudd said Australian democracy. And overturning Citizens United has to be job one, because pretty much everything else falls behind that. The corruption of our politics, the corruption of our regulatory systems, the corruption of state governments, the corruption of our information commons in order to influence politics. All of this stuff is coming out of the ability of big money to manipulate us and our politics, and it's just absolutely wrong. And I'm with you, Doug. This needs to be number one.
Well, I agree, but I would add a follow-up thought, which is simply that it's depressing to me as a citizen who wants to stay involved, where it's a hot-button issue 5-6 years ago, and now it's just kind of evaporated from the public discussion.
Well, yes and no. The number one most important piece of the For the People Act, and the main reason why the Republicans are filibustering it, is that it requires that any donations of any sort, there's all this dark money that's running through super PACs and PACs, that all of that be transparent, that it be revealed. It's not banning it, which is what I wish it would do, but it's just asking for transparency. And, the billionaires and the Koch network and all these other right-wing billionaires, they are hysterical about this. Over at FreedomWorks, they're just like all over it. They're calling it the Gag Act because it's going to gag the billionaires. They're going nuts. And that's why that bill is not going to pass, sadly. But it's money in politics. Doug, thank you for the call. Leslie in Oak Park, Illinois. Hey, Leslie, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I'm sorry that you guys are suffering from the heat. I just want to give a different perspective on how we can get people to wear masks.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. You realize that marketers can sell anything from stinky tobacco to cars being sexy, you name it, pillows and milk. So we need to change the conditioning that the GOP has put on masks, and they've conditioned us to believe that it has something to do with freedom, when it has nothing to do with freedom. It has to do more with pro-life, and they're not stressing that. We should be getting fashion designers involved. We should make it fashionistas. We should have creativity like Mardi Gras masks. We could start a whole industry of fashion, matching with blouses or headbands or anything.
Yeah.
But we've just left that out. And, there's two people who understand this, and they're both in the House. And that's Nancy Pelosi. You watch her, you look at her when she's giving her speeches, she matches her mask to her outfit.
I know.
And the other thing is, we can replace the T-shirt business thing with, people put messages and advertising on their T-shirts, put it on their masks. And you know who knows how to do that?
Sadly, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Exactly. She was standing in the House telling us, making a big speech, and she had a black mask on with the word censored on it.
Yep.
Now, how can you make a big speech and say you're censored? So all these fools have been conditioned.
Yeah.
So we need to know, who do we talk to? Kardashians? Who do we talk to? You got your mask on, your eyes are showing, and you can flirt a hell of a lot with your eyes.
There you go. It's a market opportunity, Leslie, and thank you for pointing it out. Tony in Utica, Michigan. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Thank you for taking my call, Tom. I want to comment about the man who is known as the Great Dissenter for the Supreme Court. His name is John Marshall Harlan.
Yeah.
And one thing a lot of people are not aware of was he's a very moderate jurist and lawyer from the state of Kentucky during the Civil War. In fact, he fought for the North during the Civil War. Well, one thing a lot of people are not aware of, do you know that Thurgood Marshall, when he was presenting his case for Brown versus Board of Education, he used John Marshall Harlan's dissenting argument when he made that. Yeah, when he made that against Plessy versus Ferguson. And Thurgood Marshall was so impressed with his dissenting opinion, he used it as his basis in the Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Yeah, I bounced off Justice Harlan a number of times when I was writing my book on the Supreme Court. And he is called the Great Dissenter, and some of his dissents are just really rip-roaring hot reads.
Do you know this? Do you know this, Tom? His family is the only family in the history of the Supreme Court to have a direct descendant follow him. It was his grandson,
no, I didn't know that.
John Marshall Harlan II, and Eisenhower was the one who nominated him for the Supreme Court.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll bet a lot of folks mix the two of them up. You know, I didn't know that. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. John in Houston, Texas, it says you want to disagree with me, so you go to the front of the line. What's up, John?
Well, Tom, you know, the only question I have, I keep hearing a lot of your folks talking about student loan forgiveness, and I've heard you talk about this multiple times. My question is, what about all the people that paid their student loans? Are we going to start handing out money to them because they did the right thing and paid their bills?
Yeah, that's a whataboutism type of objection, John. It's like my saying, you know, if Congress was to cut my taxes, for example, saying, well, what about last year? I paid more taxes last year. Shouldn't I get a rebate for that too? It's a nonsensical argument, John.
No, that's a play on words.
No, it's not a play on words. If we decide as a society that we are not going to have student debt, you know, there's no student debt in Japan or in Germany or in France or in Canada, you know, or in any other developed country. Student debt pretty much doesn't exist outside of people who want to go to elite universities or for graduate degrees. And if we were to decide as the United States of America that we're going to join all those other countries and say we're not going to have student debt here anymore because it's a huge drag on our economy, it's holding an entire generation down, it's preventing people from buying homes and starting families, it's preventing people from starting businesses, for that matter. It harms us on multiple levels. We're going to decide to join the rest of the world and no longer have student debt. That is a change. And just because somebody from a previous year or even a previous generation didn't benefit from that change doesn't mean we don't do it.
I don't know. I guess I just, I paid my bills. My daughter-in-law paid her bills.
I paid my bills. I paid for 4 years of college for each one of my 3 kids, and then all 3 of them now, you know, they all have massive student debt from having graduate degrees. I can see both sides of this. I totally get what you're saying. But I'm telling you, John, this is not, gee, let's just toss some money at some people, and what about the people who didn't get the money? That's not fair. This is about deciding what kind of country we are. This is about deciding whether we are going to invest in our intellectual infrastructure or whether we're going to continue to be the poor man of the developed world of the planet. And if we choose to be the poor man, using that argument that conservatives always put out about, well, what about me? I paid my debts. You know, that's kind of sad. But if we choose to go forward, there is going to be a change. There is going to be a transition, and some people are going to get more benefit than the people who preceded them. That's how it always happens. It's like, you know, when Reagan cut taxes from 74%, income taxes from 74% down to 25%. You know, you didn't have people coming out going, well, what about the taxes I paid last year or the year before last? You know, because that's your argument is the conservative argument. The conservatives are good with it. John, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Nice try. Nice try. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. Daryl in Seattle. Hey, Daryl, what's on your mind today?
Glory, hallelujah, I got you, Tom. This is a great story. I've been sitting on it for a while. My wife and I went to Cuba in '99, and it was a joy. Different, much, much different than any other place I'd ever, third world country. And I was on a different flight than my wife. I had to stay 2 extra days, and the prostitution was incredible. And there was not too many Americans there because we had to sneak in. And a lot of Germans, Swiss.
You were in the resort parts of Cuba?
No, I was in Havana.
Oh, okay.
And Tom, after my wife left, it was like almost, forgive the analogy or metaphor, whatever, like swatting flies. Women would come up to me and pretend like they wanted to film me or photograph me.
Daryl, this happens in every poor country in the world.
Okay,
I've worked in most of them. I could tell you, it's like you get approached everywhere you go.
You know what I'm talking about. I was alone. And, okay, but Tom, let's morph into Florida. I believe that we have some of these horrible governors, Hispanic, Cubanos. Well, the current one, because they never got over Fidel Castro. Tom, it's been how many years since he's died? How many years since these
I don't know
are all
since he died, but it's been 60 or more years, 70 years since the Cuban Revolution. That was 1959, 72 years.
Well, most of the people that...
No, 62 years.
Thank you. That Fidel took their property from are wealthy. They're in Florida today. They're power mongers. And what I'm getting to is how they've left their people after 30 years, let's say, plus or minus, with berry. That's what's another word for it? Blue gums, no orange juice, nothing, no vitamin C whatsoever. So it's
scurvy.
It's pretty sad. Scurvy. Thank you. Yeah. And all the bureaucrats kept away from me because their alliance is to Fidel, and they get in trouble talking to foreigners. And,
well, what you've got is you've got a bunch of people, Daryl, who owned a lot of property, particularly the ones who were mob connected. I mean, basically the American mafia ran Cuba. And, you know, it was Santo Traficante and Carlos Marcello. You know, they owned that island for all practical purposes. And so you have a bunch of people who are mob connected, who are Cubans, who owned a lot of property, and they think that if they can just overthrow the Cuban regime, that they'll get their property back. And, you know, it's not going to happen.
That's BS.
It's not going to happen, but they're hanging on to it. And they're hanging on to it, you know, with this idea of, well, you know, the Jews got some of their art back from the Nazis. We should get our property back from Fidel Castro. There's plenty of precedent out there. I'm telling you, this is what they're saying. They've called into this. I've had people call into this program saying that. Well, my grandfather had a big, you know, he owned one of the biggest hotels in Havana, and, you know, when Castro falls, we're going to have a claim through the World Court. And I was like, no, I don't think so. It's not the same thing. You know, it wasn't a genocide. It was a revolution. Daryl, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And Louise and I were in Cuba, what was it, 4 years ago, Sean? 5 years ago? It was the last year of the Obama administration. And when you could legally go to Cuba. We went there on a tour with Code Pink, with, you know, a great organization. It was a great tour. It was fascinating. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we have a new video out about the 1776 Commission. Remember this commission that Donald Trump put together to explain the history of America, to have true principles, because history is being distorted by things like the New York Times 1619 report, you know. No, seriously, this is what Donald Trump said, that, you know, we're engaging now in revisionist history by highlighting the history of slavery in the United States. And so he put together this bizarre commission, and now in the state of South Carolina, Senator Dwight Loftus and others have introduced legislation requiring that Trump's commission, which had no historians on it, 18 people, not a single historian, that commission's findings be taught as history in the public schools in South Carolina. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it's like they want to take us back to the 1930s. Check it out at TomHartman.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Paula in Plainville, Connecticut. Hey, Paula, what's on your mind?
Hi, I'm from Glastonbury, Connecticut, but that's okay.
Okay.
I'm calling because I feel like I have a pretty compassionate argument for the man who's upset because, you know, he had to pay off his kids' student loans, and he doesn't feel like he's benefiting from this new opportunity to get rid of student debt. My story is that when my husband was 54, he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, which is a death sentence. Nobody survives that. Nobody survives that. Someday, somebody is going to survive that. Someday, they're going to cure it, right? They will. But I'm not going to benefit from that. But I still would not, and it's going to be bittersweet, I'm not going to lie. But I would never say, oh, you can't cure this horrible disease just because it's not going to help me. And I just feel like this is the same thing.
That's why I pointed out this is the conservative argument against debt forgiveness, and it's a BS argument. It's a whataboutism argument. It's a logically meaningless argument, and it's a tragedy that keeps getting repeated. So.
I mean, but they don't. If people are only thinking in terms of their pocketbooks, I don't know if that what you're saying necessarily hits home.
Well, the one piece of this, and Paul, I'm so sorry to hear about your husband, by the way. That's it's got to be tough. But here's where it will help our caller, and that is that if you can relieve $1.5 or $1.7 trillion worth of student loan debt in the United States, you're going to see an explosion of economic and intellectual activity. You're going to see new creativity unleashed. You're going to see people starting small businesses. You're going to see new families. You're going to see, new housing. You're going to see new inventions. You're going to see people getting educated. You're going to see more people becoming doctors and professionals in ways that benefit society. All kinds of good stuff will come out of that, which is why every other country in the world has free college or very, very cheap college and doesn't have a student debt crisis. We are literally the only country in the world that does this to our young people. And
I agree.
Paula, I need to move along.
With you.
Thank you very much. Great to hear from you. Sarah in Arizona. Hey, Sarah, what's on your mind?
Thank you so much, Tom. All right, my rant, I borrow that from you, is about the gall-darn cowardice of the Democrats. I am 69 years old. I've lived my whole life witnessing the cowardice of the Democrats. 9/11 burst the bubble. We are part of the world. COVID-19 testifies to the line, the fraud, the failure of this checks and balances system of government, so-called government.
I get it, Sarah. I'm gonna, great rant, but I'm gonna stop you right there. I'm just, we have a two-party system here. As long as we have first past the post, winner take all elections, which is how our country was established, we are one of 7 democracies in the world where you are essentially forced to have a two-party system. And yes, the Democratic Party has a lot of failings, and it's got a lot of people in it that are not living up to my standards, like these 9 guys who are going after the reconciliation bill. but it's really the only hope we have right now. You're not going to see the Green Party come up and win the next presidential election. And so what we need to do, rather than sitting around complaining about cowards in the Democratic Party, and yes, they're there, is we need to get inside the Democratic Party. We need to fix the Democratic Party. We need to stand up for the good people in the Democratic Party. I'm not a fan of this idea that you stand taller by cutting off the heads of other people. I'm just, you know, to use a terrible cliche, but I'm just not willing to go there. Mark in Studio City. Hey, Mark, you got a quick one? I'm down to 30 seconds here.
Gerrymandering. What if we think outside the box and we get all the Democrats in the Republican states to register as independents or Republicans? How would that throw a monkey wrench into their...
It has happened before, Mark. First of all, half your states don't allow primaries, closed primaries. But that happened to when I lived in Michigan, when Michigan went with George Wallace as the Democratic nominee for president. It was Republicans voting in the Democratic primary that caused that. Thanks for the call. Hey, special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaums, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jabbermocky, Jay LeBlanc, Connor Arroyo, and Carne Verde. Thank you all. These are the folks who work on our program. And thank you for participating in our program, for listening, for saying hi to our sponsors and our stations. Thank you. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday. Tag You're It.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.